On a day of torrential rain, hundreds of muscular men carried a box containing a boy named Yukido, the son of the cult leader. Today was the day Yukido had to participate in the Musubi ritual. This ritual was quite simple. Yukido would be thrown into the raging waters, and if he could survive for 3 days, he would become the new cult leader. Yukido screamed in desperation, protesting this absurd ritual clearly. This was murder, not a ritual. Hearing Yukido's curses, his father merely smiled. Standing before the high cliff, Yukido's father began to loudly invoke the ritual name. Mitama, the deity of their cult, was the supreme, omniscient, and omnipotent god, so surely he would protect Yukido. With those words, Yukido's father ordered his subordinates to throw his son straight into the sea. As Yukido sank into the water, memories from his past flooded his mind, from the day he was abducted by members of this cult while he was out flirting with girls, to the series of painful and unfortunate days that followed. Despite Yukido repeatedly telling himself everything would be fine, his mind grew increasingly empty, to the point where he couldn't even feel anything while watching adult films. Yukido's consciousness began to fade. At this point, he no longer believed in anything. If gods existed, then when he was reincarnated, he wished to be reborn in a world without deities. Indeed, Yukido's wish came true. He hazily woke up to find a girl playing with his lower body. Seeing that Yukido was still alive, she jumped in surprise, screamed, and then profusely apologized. She took his hand and promised to take care of him until his wounds healed completely. She introduced herself as Aru, who worked at a nearby restaurant, and said she would treat Yukido to meals until he got tired of them. At this point, Yukido began to notice his surroundings. He was in a very peaceful countryside village. Yukido's face reddened. This was exactly like the reincarnation trope that was so popular. So he immediately asked Aru where the Adventurers Guild was located. Hearing this, Aru led Yukido to follow her. Yukido happily ran after her, thinking this was exactly the world of his dreams. After all the extremely bad luck in his previous life, he was determined to live a truly happy life this time. At least that's what Yukido thought. But reality turned out differently. Aru led him to a garden where villagers were working in the fields. A farming quest. Why was it so mundane? While Yukido was wondering why, a young man came to pick a fight with him. He got right in Yukido's face and declared that all the girls in the village belonged to him, and if Yukido touched any of them. Before he could finish his threat, someone else hit him on the head and dragged him away. This person introduced himself as Cullen, and the one who had just threatened Yukido was Roy. Though it was abrupt, they needed Yukido's help with something. Cullen then handed Yukido a dagger. Yukido's eyes lit up at the sight of the dagger. This must be his starting equipment. It was time to fight monsters. Yukido was fired up. But that wasn't the case at all. Cullen actually needed help harvesting grapes. Yukido cut bunch after bunch, thinking to himself that this must be a beginner's challenge, and he needed to perform well. So Yukido worked diligently until evening. Thanks to his help, Cullen and Roy had harvested a lot this time, but they weren't happy about it. On the contrary, they were worried because this type of grape was very difficult to preserve. If they couldn't sell them soon, they would spoil quickly. Roy wondered if there was any way to overcome this issue. And so Yukido made wine from these fruits for the villagers, producing so much that they were drinking and pouring it away because there was too much. It had been a month since Yukido arrived in this world, and all he had done revolved around farming activities, from tending livestock to making wine and harvesting. Yukido was very bored. This wasn't the life he had hoped for. The next morning, as usual, Yukido went out to work in the fields. While working, someone ran by shouting at him to run away quickly. A huge beast emerged from the forest, startling Yukido. This was a monster, wasn't it? Seeing this, Roy explained to Yukido that it was just a wild animal. Then Roy pulled out a book and began muttering, which made Yukido's eyes light up. Was he preparing to cast a spell? Expectations were high, but the disappointment was even greater. Roy was just pretending. 2 seconds later, he grabbed Yukido and ran away. Yukido angrily grabbed Roy by the collar, wondering why Roy didn't fight it. Roy looked at Yukido with wide eyes and casually replied, "What makes you think a normal person could fight a wild animal?" Yukido pointed to the book, asking what it was if not for fighting. It turned out to be just a survival guide. That evening, Roy and Yukido returned to the tavern to continue having fun. By this point, Yukido had accepted reality. This world had no concept of magic whatsoever. Seeing Yukido sitting in a corner, lost in thought, Aru approached to chat with him. Since Yukido had arrived, the villagers had become much more open and happy. She hoped that, if possible, Yukido would stay with them forever. Hearing this, Yukido just smiled. His previously unlucky life had been replaced with joy like this, which was more than enough. He should thank the gods for bringing him to this world. Hearing this, Aru curiously asked Yukido, What the hell is a god? Surprisingly, this world not only lacked magic, but also had no religion, deities, or spirituality at all. While walking in the forest, Yukito suddenly saw the carcass of an animal. He recalled that there didn't seem to be a cemetery in the village. If there were no deities, how did they bury the dead? At that moment, Roy and Aru suddenly appeared behind him. Roy approached and whispered in Yukito's ear that he had discovered a forbidden book. Thinking it might be something mysterious, it turned out to be just an adult book. Afterward, the group traveled to the Imperial capital. Along the way, Roy and Aru introduced everything to Yukito. Roy pointed toward the palace, saying that's where His Majesty the Emperor lived. Everything they knew, from survival training to growing produce, was taught by him. Now that they were here, Yukito should feel free to explore. But with one caution, don't talk to the citizens, because their village was hated by the capital's residents. Roy and Aru led Yukito to a bookstore. Yukito was curious to see how explicit the adult books of this world were. But when he opened one, he saw nothing particularly interesting, just some scribbled drawings that were considered adult content. He turned around to see Roy and Aru, both blushing intensely. After buying the books, Yukito went outside and accidentally saw a crowd gathering. He curiously squeezed in to see, and the scene before his eyes made him freeze. A line of people taking poison to commit suicide. Aru appeared and pulled Yukito away while he was still confused about what was happening. Aru explained that it was the Emperor's end-of-life policy. Everyone in the kingdom had to follow this system, but Yukito shouldn't worry because their village didn't have to comply. That night, while Yukito was sleeping, Aru somehow snuck under his blanket. She had studied the adult book from earlier very carefully. It taught many ways to make men healthier, and she wanted to practice on Yukito. After a while, Aru calmed down and apologized to Yukito. She explained that she ended up in this village for similar reasons. Their village was called Kakuri, a place that gathered strays and those who feared the Emperor's end-of-life policy. Everyone in the town hated them. But Yukito was different. He happily played with them and even let Aru touch him. This made her very happy. Meeting him was truly a blessing. At this moment, Aru noticed the stone around Yukito's neck. Seeing that Aru seemed to like it a lot, Yukito gave it to her since, to him, it was just a cheap gem the old man had given him. The next morning, Yukito woke up and went downstairs to the restaurant, but no one was there. He opened the door and found Roy lying there, covered in wounds. Yukito hurriedly helped his friend up and asked what happened. Roy burst into tears and explained the situation. Their village was a gathering place for the discarded. Today was the day when Aru and Shiru would be forced to end their lives. They had already been taken away by the army. Yukito gritted his teeth, put Roy down, and jumped onto a horse-drawn carriage with Cullen, rushing to the Imperial capital. By this time, Shiru was already gone, and Aru was preparing to accept her death sentence. Yukito rushed down to attack the soldiers. He turned to look at Shiru's body and angrily shouted, "If they fear death, what right do they have to force others to die like this?" Hearing this, the captain of the guard drew his sword to block Yukito, saying that as citizens of the holy city, they must obey the Emperor's orders. If Yukito dared to interfere, he would also die. He struck Yukito once, and then Aru suffered a similar fate. Watching Aru fall, Yukito's eyes turned white as he crawled toward her. At this moment, the old man's words echoed in his mind, "God Mitama will protect you." But shouldn't a god protect good people like these? Yukito gripped the necklace tightly, and immediately, a blinding light shot straight into the sky. From the clouds, a small girl flew down and grabbed Yukito. Seeing Yukito pale-faced and covered in wounds, the girl angrily killed all the guards in the area, then used her power to bring Yukito and Aru back to life. Aru crawled up, confused, not understanding what was happening. She turned to see the small girl now sitting on Yukito's head. The girl introduced herself as Mitama, Yukito's deity. Afterward, Mitama spun around boastfully, saying that she had initially only intended to save Yukito, but since it had been a long time since she'd used her powers, she accidentally saved everyone here. Hearing this, Yukito glanced down at Mitama, thinking, bringing the dead back to life, could she really be a god? That evening, Yukito led Aru and Shiru back to the village. Roy, emotionally overwhelmed, rushed forward, using this as an excuse to hug Shiru, but she was too alert, causing Roy to faceplant. Shiru smiled brightly and explained to the whole village that at first, she thought she had died, but somehow she was still alive. This was a miracle, truly a miracle. Everyone cheered and threw a celebration party. This was the happiest feast of their lives, although only Yukito sat in a corner, pondering. Although he had saved Aru and Shiru this time, he had offended the Emperor. Their village was on the border of the Imperial capital, and they had no military strength or weapons to resist. The only option now was to rely on Mitama. Seeing Yukito looking so gloomy, Roy came over to ask what was wrong. But before Yukito could answer, Roy had already poured a cup of wine on his face. Meanwhile, in the girl's room, Aru was struggling to dress Mitama, who absolutely refused and tried to escape. Being away from Yukito, even for a moment, was unbearable for the little girl. After a while, Aru finally caught Mitama. Seeing Mitama constantly calling for Yukito, Aru curiously asked about her relationship with him. Hearing this, Mitama proudly declared that they had an eternal relationship, living together until the end of their lives. With those words, Aru collapsed according to Mitama's explanation. Weren't they already committed to each other? Could it be that Yukito's preference was for small girls like Mitama? Aru screamed, determined to find a way to make Yukito change his mind. At this moment, Mitama suddenly approached and patted Aru's head. She had observed very carefully and noticed that the villagers were very fond of Yukito. If Yukito was loved, it made her happy too. She hoped they would continue to treat Yukito this way from now on. Downstairs at the tavern, Yukito went to find Cullen. There were still many things he didn't understand about this kingdom. What exactly was this end-of-life tradition? Cullen didn't know much about it either. He only knew that the system had been established thousands of years ago. While listening attentively, Mitama rushed from behind and bumped into Yukito. From the left corner of the table, Roy's eyes were fixed on the little girl. "She's so beautiful," Roy exclaimed. He jumped up, grabbed Mitama's hand, and proposed to her, only to be completely rejected by the little girl. After everyone left to play together, Yukito finally had time to sit alone and talk with Mitama. He asked if her power could stand against an entire nation's army. Mitama confidently said yes, all she needed to do was create a flood with a swirl, and she wanted to demonstrate it to Yukito right away. Mitama ran to the table and used her power, creating a cup full of wine, which made Yukito freeze. No way, how could this small amount of water sweep away an entire kingdom? Mitama was also confused. She drew a circle on the table, and a round zero appeared, making Mitama panic and sweat. As a deity, she needed followers, and the more followers she had, the greater her power would be. But why didn't she have any followers now? Mitama turned and grabbed Yukito by the collar, shaking him. She had used her power to save him, yet not even Yukito was her follower. Just then, a young man rushed in with news that the army had mobilized soldiers and was heading their way. Hearing this, everyone remained calm. Roy approached, put his arm around Yukito's shoulder, and declared, "It doesn't matter how many of them come, Yukito will definitely solve everything." Hearing this, Yukito just mumbled and walked away. He secluded himself in the bathtub, his hands trembling, not knowing what to do. Seeing that Yukito seemed unusual, Mitama also sneaked in. Yukito then opened up to Mitama, saying that because of him, the village would be targeted by the Imperial capital. Seeing this, Mitama advised Yukito to run away. Yukito immediately refused, saying he had run away too many times in his previous life. Now he would live true to himself. Yukito firmly turned to ask Mitama if her power would increase when the number of followers increased. If so, he would create a deity and religion in this world. The first person they targeted was Roy, who became Mitama's follower without much explanation needed. To face the Imperial capital's army, Mitama estimated they would need 10,000 followers. That would be enough for Mitama to burn down an entire kingdom. The fastest way to gain followers was to demonstrate magic. But currently, Mitama was just a little girl, so Yukito had to change his plan with a speech. Fortunately, in his previous life, the old man had taught him how to move the hearts of followers. Mitama felt that Yukito didn't need to bother. Although she currently had no power, she had lived for billions of years. With knowledge from that much time, she knew well how to move the hearts of followers. Then Yukito led Mitama to give a speech. Standing on a rock, Mitama began her prepared speech. But instead of profound knowledge, she just talked about Yukito's childhood stories. Frustrated by this, Yukito jumped up and covered Mitama's mouth. This speech was enough. It was indeed his turn to do it. A while later, Yukito gathered everyone in the village. He had prepared an altar for Mitama to sit on, which confused everyone. Yukito began his presentation, pointing to Mitama and telling them she was a deity who blessed her followers. Knowing that just words wouldn't convince anyone, Yukito had prepared a blessing. He suddenly called Aru and asked if she was currently in a difficult relationship with someone. Aru jumped, embarrassed, and answered with her face turning red, wondering if Yukito had discovered her feelings for him. Of course, Yukito didn't know anything. This was completely a skill he had learned, a skill that fortune tellers often used, saying vague things that could apply to anyone. Everything was going according to plan when suddenly Mitama spoke up, ruining everything. She pointed at Aru and began to guess her problems randomly, shocking her. After the speech, back at the tavern, Yukito slammed the table and complained that his deity was too stupid. Besides eating, she was useless. But this didn't make him give up. Yukito tried to come up with more tricks to attract followers, from performing magic tricks to appealing to them with cuteness. But no matter what they did, no one came to see them. Yukito sprawled on the table, very bored and not knowing what to do. Creating a cult was too difficult. His old man must have been very talented to create this cult. Not knowing what to do next, Aru came rushing in, making Yukito think the Imperial army had arrived. But that wasn't it. Aru's dog, Kairu, had accidentally eaten poison and was about to die. Yukito wanted to quickly take it to a veterinarian, but Aru and Shiru just shook their heads. They were outcasts from the Imperial capital. No one would help them. That evening, as they were feeling sad, Yukito returned covered in dirt, holding a handful of grass. He used the grass to make an antidote for Kairu. This surprised Mitama. Yukito's current behavior was completely different from before. Yukito didn't know why either. At that moment, he just didn't want the two sisters to be sad. Despite trying his best, Kairu still didn't make it. Aru burst into tears when suddenly Mitama placed her hand on the table. The little girl used her power to resurrect Kairu, to everyone's amazement. Then Mitama collapsed on the table, her body completely dried up. With just one follower, this was all she could do. As soon as she finished speaking, Mitama's body surged with power again. It turned out her follower count had increased to 3. With just 3 followers, Mitama's power had become extraordinary, which surprised even Yukito. Mitama thought it might be because Aru and Shiru's physical condition was different from normal people, but Yukito thought differently. Perhaps Mitama's power increased based on how her followers believed in her. For example, Roy said he was a follower but was actually just simping for Mitama, while Aru and Shiru had witnessed Mitama's divine power firsthand, which was why they became followers. Mitama excitedly pointed to Aru and Shiru, declaring that now that she had regained her power, she would fulfill their wishes. Aru had a wish to resurrect the people from the Imperial army. Mitama used her power to resurrect them, including Captain Bertrand, but it seemed Mitama had made a mistake in choosing the gender. He had been transformed from a man into a woman, but that didn't matter. It was actually better this way. Mitama laughed uproariously. It seemed like a world without magic, but that fact was carefully concealed. In the forest near Yukito's village, a person with the codename Adder was carrying out a mission there. With just one strike, she instantly dispatched a monster. After being resurrected by Mitama, Knight Captain Bertrand tried to find her way back to the Holy City. But in this female form, no matter how much she explained, she couldn't make the army believe her. Unable to enter the city, Bertrand could only spend the night in the nearby forest. Sitting by the campfire with tears in her eyes, she thought about how even an honorable knight of the Imperial capital could be reduced to this state. If she had been abandoned by the kingdom, how should she live now? As she sat there feeling dejected, Roy appeared to mock her. "Where's that threatening attitude from this morning when you wanted to destroy the entire village? Why are you so helpless now?" Then Roy began to use perverted actions to intimidate her. Bertrand's hand firmly gripped her sword, wanting to draw it but unable to. As a soldier serving His Majesty, she wasn't permitted to draw her sword unless it was for a righteous cause. Just then, Yukito appeared, throwing Roy aside to handle the situation himself. Although Yukito had only been in the village, he knew everything about Bertrand, from her inability to draw her sword to the fact that she had been discarded by the Empire. Yukito extended his hand, inviting Bertrand to come with him. He promised to create a place where she would belong. Bertrand smirked at Yukito, saying that even though she didn't want to, Yukito still owed her a debt, and she vowed to repay him for it in this lifetime. Life in the village returned to its normal orbit. That morning, another wild animal attacked the villagers. Ricky volunteered to stay behind to protect everyone so they could escape. Yukito and Mitama appeared, and Mitama used her power to summon a sword for Ricky to use. According to her introduction, this was the legendary super powerful Kusanagi sword, but somehow it couldn't even make a scratch on the beast. Yukito grabbed Mitama by the collar, questioning her repeatedly, but Mitama was also at a loss. She only knew from legend that it was supposed to be super powerful. The monster was right behind them now. Yukito and Mitama screamed, and at that moment, Bertrand appeared. She plunged her sword straight into the monster's head and ordered everyone to step back. Indeed, as the captain of the royal guard, Bertrand split the monster in half with just one strike. This left Yukito gaping in astonishment. What had she just done? The sword she held was certainly no ordinary weapon. The corner of Yukito's mouth curled up. This time he had picked up a real bargain. A useful chess piece like Bertrand would definitely be fully utilized. Taking advantage of having many people present, Yukito didn't forget to spread the word about his cult. He declared that if everyone worshipped Mitama as a deity, then from now on, they would no longer need to fear such trivial wild beasts. To help Yukito, Aru even changed the menu wine. Once a common item, was now only served to members of the cult. To increase the number of followers, Yukito used every method to attract them. Fortunately, since this world was still backward, there were many things Yukito could exploit. He brought out a large jar and placed it in front of them, explaining that this was something that would help them preserve food longer. If they pledged to join the cult, each household would receive one for free. People asked Yukito where he got so many jars from. Of course, they were made not by Yukito, but by Roy, to produce enough jars for the entire village. He had been working for 3 straight days. But all it took was one scolding from Mitama, and Roy would resume working with fiery enthusiasm like a madman. That wasn't all. Yukito also made cookies to give to everyone who joined the cult. Thanks to his efforts, in just one day, Mitama's followers increased to over 100 people. At first, it was truly difficult, but for Yukito, it had become much easier now. Perhaps this world had never had the concept of deities before, but precisely because of that, people didn't hesitate to join when given a few useful items. Because of this, Yukito's cult would be a bit different from modern ones. Instead of joining for faith, they were joining for benefits. Using Aru and Shiru's food and Bertrand's strength to attract them, Yukito was determined to utilize everything he had. After Mitama left, Yukito began to reconsider. Although the number of followers had increased, exactly how many would be needed to stand against a royal army? At that moment, Bertrand appeared, and Yukito took the opportunity to ask. Of course, he wasn't asking to fight against the king, but simply to protect them. Regarding this, Bertrand could only tell Yukito that he had made a very big mistake. The king's power didn't come from the army, but from a small group of soldiers who had been granted special powers by him. She had never seen them personally, but rumor had it they were all incredibly powerful, capable of blowing away a mountain in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, Adder, under the king's orders, was already preparing to target the Kakuri village. After talking with Bertrand, Yukito rushed home to ask Mitama if she could split a mountain in half. Mitama proudly and confidently boasted that this was too simple. Give her 10,000 followers, and she could split 10 mountains. Hearing this, Yukito's face darkened. No good, she was too useless. He needed to find another way. So Yukito went to find Bertrand again, pushing her against a tree, making her face turn red. She thought Yukito was going to harass her, but that wasn't it. Yukito was just curious about Bertrand's sword. Earlier, he had seen Bertrand split a wild beast in half with this sword. What secret did it hold? There was a large rock in front of them. Bertrand stepped forward, drew her sword, and with just one stroke, easily split the large rock in half. Regarding the principle behind this sword, Bertrand was also clueless. Only certain positions in the army were granted such weapons by the king, and only he knew their power. The next morning, Shiru and Cullen were summoned by Yukito for a private meeting. Why only these two? Simply because they were the most intelligent among the followers. Yukito got straight to the point. Soon the royal army would attack the village, so he wanted to ask for Cullen and Shiru's opinions on whether they had ever considered relocating the village. Cullen firmly stated that this wasn't possible. If they made any too conspicuous moves, they would certainly be taken away even faster. As they found themselves in a deadlock, at that moment, Yukito learned an important piece of information. Kakuri village was not the only one. It was just a name for villages that had been abandoned. Besides their village, there were many other similar villages around the Imperial capital. Just as he finished speaking, Roy's group burst into the tavern, having smelled the wine, and so another grand drinking session began. That night, Adder called a teammate named Loki to ask about the next mission. Loki provided Adder with information about a rather dangerous wild animal and asked her to check it out. Meanwhile, after the drinking session, Yukito was still racking his brain for solutions. Seeing that Yukito was still awake, Shiru approached to check on him, taking the opportunity to pat his head in gratitude for everything he had done for the village. Although she didn't fully understand the cult that Yukito talked about, she knew that what he did was to protect them. Yukito had already done more than enough, so he shouldn't overexert himself. These words from Shiru reminded Yukito of what the old man had said. At first, his cult also had only 100 people, but it increased to an enormous number after just one time when he destroyed a fraudulent cult in another city. What the old man taught him here was that to increase the number of followers, one had to take over other areas as well. Yukito realized this and immediately called Cullen the next morning for a private conversation. Cullen didn't understand what Yukito wanted to convey, but there was one point Cullen needed to remind Yukito of. Their village was different from the Imperial capital in that here everyone was free, so if Yukito wanted to do something, he should feel free to do it. And so, a month had passed. As usual, Bertrand continued her duty of protecting the village. Feeling bored with nothing to do, she was startled when Adder suddenly appeared. After inspecting, Adder confirmed that Bertrand was the former captain of the Royal Guard. But given the reason for Bertrand's presence here, she immediately accused Bertrand of treason, beat her severely, and then dragged her deep into the forest. Adder didn't kill Bertrand immediately, wanting to know why Bertrand's gender had been changed first. At that moment, a scene before her shocked Adder the Kakiri village had changed dramatically. A meeting was being held with the participation of Cullen and Shiru. Yukido planned to gather about 10,000 more followers. They were intelligent people, so he called them there to discuss the plan. Regarding this, Cullen and Shiru were completely at a loss. Their village had only about 2,000 people. How could they possibly have enough people for Yukido's requirements? Yukido understood this and had already changed his plan. From now on, he would use everything at his disposal to create benefits for everyone, thereby attracting them to join the cult. In the field, Roy excitedly drove the harvester that Yukido had provided. With this tool, the farmer's harvesting speed increased many times over, which amazed everyone who witnessed it. In front of them, Yukido immediately informed them that this was a tool created by the divine power of Lord Mitama. If they believed in Lord Mitama's power, they would be given this super tool. Having witnessed this firsthand, how could they not believe? Everyone shouted and competed to receive the tool. Yukido turned to call Mitama, who was lying motionless on the ground, affectionately telling her it was time to create more tools for her followers. Thanks to this campaign, the number of Mitama's followers increased dramatically, jumping straight from 100 to 900 people. This number of people had made Mitama much stronger. She believed that at this point, even if the royal army came, they couldn't defeat her. Of course, Yukido didn't believe these empty words. What should he do next? Yukido pondered. As he was thinking, Aru walked in. She had just come back from drawing water from the well, but accidentally spilled it all in front of him. This immediately gave Yukido an idea. That's it, water is something every household must use. So Yukido immediately designed a water pipeline for Aru. Water flowed from the tap, surprising Aru greatly. With something as convenient as this, from now on, she wouldn't need to go to the well to draw water anymore. As she was showing it to Yukido, Shiru shouted his name from behind. He turned around and was sprayed directly in the face with water. Shiru, in a hot bikini, pulled out 2 more sets and urged Aru and Yukido to quickly put them on. Another brilliant idea. Right in front of Yukido's house, a super huge swimming pool appeared, where the girls in the village could wear bikinis and run around. Roy stood watching, his eyes almost popping out. The stimulation was too much for him to handle. His nose bled, and he collapsed. Aru had just changed into her bikini when Shiru pushed her in front of Yukido. Yukido remained as indifferent as always, complimenting Aru just for the sake of it, but it was enough to make Aru very happy. Meanwhile, Mitama, her body completely dried up, emerged from the water, tugging at Yukido's pants and complaining. Although she was the goddess of the earth, and drawing underground water and building pipelines was something she did routinely, doing it for the entire village was still too exhausting. Yukido didn't bother to care because shortly after, Mitama had fully recovered. The number of their followers once again surged, from 900 to now 1,600 people. But for Yukido, this was still not enough. Next would be the breakthrough plan to create something truly special compared to others. That evening, Shiru's store was lit up with bright lights, welcoming people in for drinks. Aru and Shiru, dressed in bunny outfits, greeted everyone. Although very embarrassed, Aru still had to try her best because this was what Yukido had asked her to do. From the top of the hill, Yukido, Cullen, and Bertrand stood watching the panorama of the village. Electric lighting was the greatest invention in human history. They used it to conquer the night, and this was how Yukido showed his difference. Bertrand stood watching, completely stunned. This scene was truly difficult to describe in just a few words. Cullen also felt the same way this scene before them. Even the Imperial capital couldn't have. At most, they would only light a few oil lamps. Hearing this, Bertrand furrowed her brow. How did Cullen understand so much about the Imperial palace? Cullen smiled and told them everything. He had previously worked at the Imperial palace. Cullen took off his shirt to show them there was no beheading mark. Cullen lived here simply because he liked freedom. Then Cullen turned to look at Mitama. At first, Cullen thought he was quite peculiar, but now he found Mitama even more peculiar, constantly talking about something called deities. On this occasion, Cullen wanted Yukido to explain more clearly what exactly this deity thing he mentioned was. Yukido explained it as simply as possible to both of them. Deities are entities that transcend human understanding, surpassing even the laws of nature. Hearing this, Bertrand spoke up, saying that according to Yukido's explanation, it sounded quite similar to the Emperor. Natural disasters, epidemics, wild beasts, there was nothing he didn't know about. In just one night, the number of Mitama's followers had increased to 2,000 people. This meant that all the people in the village had been won over. Yukito was preparing for the next step when Roy came running in, reporting that Bertrand was being beaten up by a girl. On Bertrand's side, Adder was examining a water hose. She grabbed Bertrand's hair, demanding her to reveal everything these strange tools. Besides the Emperor or the Congress, no one else in the kingdom could make them. At that moment, a call came in. It was Loki asking about the situation. Adder reported everything. After listening, Loki reminded Adder of something from the past. There had once been an archon who betrayed the Emperor. Currently, this Kakiri village seemed similar, so Adder should know what to do. Cutting off the call, Adder grabbed Bertrand. At first, she had intended to take Bertrand back to the kingdom for sentencing. But now it seemed she would have to use force to make Bertrand reveal the information. Mitama suddenly appeared behind Adder and attacked. She pointed at Adder's face, declaring that she was a deity, and here she was the law, not any emperor. This made Adder furious, and she fired an energy beam at them. When the dust cleared, Mitama wasn't scratched at all, which surprised Adder. One move was enough. Mitama summoned tree people who rushed forward to attack Adder. Adder bent her back to defend herself. She cut down the tree people, but they continued to stand up and fight. They were in front, to the right, to the left, and behind her. Very quickly, she was controlled by Mitama. Mitama placed her hands on the ground and summoned 2 giant vines, striking Adder hard. It seemed like it was over, but that was just a greeting. Adder broke the vines and escaped. From her body radiated numerous strange hands, making Yukito sweat with worry. Mitama had already used too much power and wanted to end it with one more strike. Mitama summoned a 9-headed tree snake to attack Adder, but this time was completely different from before. With just one move, Adder destroyed Mitama's attack. Back at the village, everyone gathered at Shiru's house. Everyone was worried, wondering if they would be safe staying there. Shiru was out of ideas. Yukito had ordered them not to go outside. Aru disagreed. Yukito was fighting to protect them. Although she couldn't do anything, she still wanted to be by his side, so she ran outside. By this time, Mitama was on her knees, unable to believe that a deity like her had lost to a mere child. Yukito frantically shouted, begging Mitama to hang on. Thanks to that, a bit of power returned. Mitama decided to go all out, summoning all the primordial deities to face off against Adder, but it seemed to be a mistake. After seeing the current number of Mitama's followers, they immediately returned. After a big explosion, Mitama burst into tears, apologizing to Yukito for not being able to help him. Yukito hurriedly ran to embrace and protect the little girl. Aru and Shiru's group did the same. On Adder's side, after the previous attack, she was just as devastated. She was furious and gathered another energy ball, throwing it straight at the Kakiri village. Yukito could only watch helplessly as the village exploded before his eyes. Suddenly, a voice rang out, and the village was instantly completely restored. Adder whirled around to look. It was Cullen. Somehow she called Cullen Loki. Having been discovered, Cullen didn't hide anything anymore. He reverted to his true form, introducing himself as Loki, one of the Pillar Archons. Adder pointed her hand at Cullen threateningly. Just now, Cullen had dared to prevent her from attacking. Based on his next answer, she would decide his punishment. Cullen didn't care about Adder at all and walked around behind Yukito and Mitama, patting their heads. The time is ripe. Why not destroy this empire altogether? Yukito was startled by Cullen's statement. Clearly, he was on the Emperor's side, so how could he utter such words? Meanwhile, Adder had already gathered her energy. Anyone who dared to openly betray the Emperor must die. But before she could attack, Cullen had somehow moved behind her and stabbed Adder with one strike. It seemed like Adder was about to die, but somehow Cullen just needed to snap his fingers, and that wound disappeared. It turned out he had used his power on Adder, and that stab was just an illusion. Having finished, he turned to call Yukito, telling him to come to the Imperial Palace. Knowing he couldn't resist, Yukito reluctantly followed. Adder was also bound and brought along. Yukito followed him into the Grand Hall where the Emperor received audiences. As soon as she saw the Emperor, Adder rushed forward, kneeling down and begging for forgiveness for allowing these traitors to appear here. The Emperor pardoned Adder, saying this was completely within his expectations. Then he turned to address Yukito, mocking how Yukito's struggles to survive were truly amusing. Even while sitting in the palace, he still knew what Yukito was doing. This made Yukito break out in a cold sweat of fear. How on earth did the Emperor know about deities? Could he also be someone from another world? The Emperor continued his speech, letting Yukito know that he had seen many countries collapse due to the existence of deities. So in his empire, he had racked his brains to find ways to prevent such collapse by controlling the people properly and following regulations. Yukito was sweating profusely listening to this when suddenly a loud noise rang out. It was caused by Mitama, who had just knocked over a pillar in the palace. Then Mitama pointed toward the throne, saying that from the moment she stepped into this room, she had felt something strange. As soon as she finished speaking, the room instantly transformed. Yukito jumped in shock when the emperor who had just been sitting in front of him had now changed into a dry skeleton. At this point, Cullen finally spoke up. Indeed, Mitama was able to detect this. He stepped up to the throne, kicked away the skeleton, and sat down. As they had seen, the emperor of this country had been dead for a long time. All the affairs of the empire were operated from this room and this device. Since the emperor's death, he had handed over the administrative power to Cullen. But even after such a long time, he still didn't understand the operating mechanism of this machine. Then he showed everything to Yukito, from information to operation methods. Everything in the empire was handled by machines, yet the empire still developed very prosperously. Who knows how long it had been, perhaps hundreds of years, that this country had been operating in this way. Seeing Yukito still looking confused, Mitama laughed and explained to him. Yukito was truly clueless. This country had already faced extinction once tens of thousands of years ago. At that time, a group of people who considered themselves intelligent stood up and used their power once more to create a world that would never perish again. But because of this, their faith in the deities faded over time. Hearing this, Yukito quickly grabbed Mitama and asked urgently, "What exactly was this world?" "What do you mean? Isn't it obvious? This is Earth, just in the future. You prayed to the deities to let you live in a world without gods, so Mitama brought you here," she answered. Enough small talk. Cullen stepped down and told Mitama it was time to destroy this room. If they did so, the end-of-life regime and all the rule of the empire would be abolished. Adder firmly objected, but Cullen didn't care. He was tired. The ruler had been dead for a long time. Why should he remain loyal? At this moment, Yukito suddenly called out to Cullen, then unexpectedly kicked him. Cullen immediately drew his knife and rushed to attack Yukito. In an instant, Yukito had knocked Cullen to the ground and forced him to reveal his purpose. Yukito had observed very carefully earlier in this room. Archons like them couldn't use their powers. That's why Cullen needed Mitama's power. For a long time, Cullen had been sick of the country's end-of-life regime. Even insects knew to flee when their lives were in danger. But why were the people in this kingdom so stupid as to accept it as a matter of course? Cullen wondered why they were like this. He went back to the room and checked the old documents of the king, only to discover that he had also once lived in a world where people worshipped deities. Although at this point, Cullen had no idea what a deity was. Afterward, Cullen had disguised himself and infiltrated the Kakuri village to live there. This place was indeed very different from the Imperial capital, where people could live freely in their own way. But there would also be a time when they must accept the duty to end their lives. Just when Cullen was racking his brains to find a solution, Yukito appeared, someone who constantly talked about incomprehensible things and used his knowledge to create objects that had never appeared in this world before. The climax was the day Yukito went to rescue Aru and Shuru. Cullen had witnessed with his own eyes the appearance of Mitama, up to the day when Yukito summoned him and Shuru to discuss the doctrine for the cult. Simply put, the doctrine was the slogan of the cult that any follower who heard it must absolutely believe in. Being stuck not knowing what to propose, Cullen had given his own opinion, and the slogan for their doctrine was, "Live truly free." And so their doctrine was written on a flag by Yukito and hung up. "This is a brilliant idea," Yukito had said, patting Cullen's shoulder in thanks before leaving. At this point, Mitama had run up to warn Cullen lightly, "Don't use your female form to seduce Yukito." This remark from Mitama greatly surprised Cullen. That was also the moment he truly believed Mitama was a deity, when she discovered his perfect disguise, something no one else could do. Back to the present, Cullen further informed Yukito that the archons were created by the emperor according to the model of the deities. Because of this, they could also increase their power when they had followers. This had been tested by Cullen in another Kakuri village. Adder still firmly opposed Cullen, so Cullen simply enlightened her. Among the archons, Adder was the only one who objected. The rest had all agreed. It proved they were also tired of this regime. "Now, let's destroy this world to give birth to a world of deities, shall we?" Yukito sheathed his sword and stood up. "This idea is quite good. Let's just do it then." Yukito called for Mitama to act, and so Mitama used her power to destroy the Imperial palace. From it grew a massive ancient tree. Yukito fully knew that when he had done this, soon the archons would fight each other for power. But so what? They were just fakes, never comparable to the real Mitama by his side. After finishing their business at the Imperial capital, Yukito's group returned to the village for a grand celebration. Now they wouldn't have to worry about the army targeting them anymore, nor fear having to fulfill that end-of-life duty. Yukito stood to the side, complaining that everyone was too carefree. They didn't understand the current situation, which was even worse than before. At this point, Loki chimed in with Yukito, saying this was too similar to how they lived every day. Loki's appearance here made Yukito curious, and he turned to ask her. Loki just smiled and advised Yukito to care more about himself, because perhaps this would be the last time they could talk to each other like this. Moreover, she also wanted to have a farewell drink with her old teammates. At this moment, Roy, drunk as a skunk, came looking for Loki. He couldn't believe that the person who had once walked arm in arm with him was such a well-endowed woman. Roy moved closer, his hands trembling, wanting to touch Loki's chest. Somehow Loki actually guided Roy's hand to her chest and began to make strange noises. Roy's face turned red as he enjoyed it thoroughly. It seemed like Roy had received a big surprise, but that wasn't the case. It was just an illusion created by Loki. The person whose chest Roy was touching was actually Ricky. Loki burst out laughing with satisfaction, then turned to look at Yukito. Yukito's expression remained very serious. It seemed Yukito had already planned to prepare for confrontation with the Archon group. Mitama jumped out in front of Loki and declared there was nothing to fear. Soon she would show these fake gods the power of a true deity. Only then did Yukito speak up to mock Mitama. You've already lost once, yet you can still talk so confidently. Hearing this, Mitama hurriedly explained that it was just because her form wasn't stable at that time. She was certain she would win next time. Loki finished her last sip of wine, and it was time for her to leave. She gently reminded Yukito about Adder now that the Imperial capital's machines had all been destroyed. She would no longer be able to use weapons. Yukito could deal with her however he wanted. Only now did Yukito respond to Loki's words. He didn't care what she or the next Archons would do. He simply wanted to protect this village. And if Loki truly intended to target it, Yukito would use any means necessary and would not go easy on her. Adder lay collapsed in a corner of the table, her mouth calling for the king, not knowing what to do next. At this moment, Aru appeared and offered her ice cream. Meanwhile, Loki, who was walking outside, was intercepted by Bertrand. Yukito might have the kindness to let her go, but Bertrand didn't. If Loki had any intention of targeting this village, they should settle it right now. Loki smiled and snapped her fingers, reverting Bertrand's body back to male form. While Bertrand was rejoicing, Loki snapped her fingers again, pulling Bertrand back to reality. Unlike Adder, she could still use her powers at will. If Bertrand really wanted to fight, he was certainly no match for her. Knowing he couldn't win, Bertrand decided to follow Loki to the Imperial capital. As a knight, he couldn't allow her to do whatever she wanted. After a grand drinking session, it was time to disperse. Everyone went home except for Adder, who still lay motionless. Shuru, quite drunk, pushed all responsibility to Yukito, telling him to do whatever he wanted. Afterward, Yukito approached Adder to encourage her. He had been forced to destroy all the Empire's machines to protect the village. But now it wasn't the end of hope. Yukito extended his hand, inviting Adder to follow him. Once again, they would fight side by side against the Archons and then restore this empire. After seeing the abilities of Loki and Adder, Yukito was certain that the Archons' powers were terrifying. If he could control all of them, he would be able to restore the Congress's system. Thanks to these words from Yukito, his alliance was established. After all, Adder's psychology was still that of a child, so it was much easier to talk to her. Afterward, Yukito went to get ice cream for Adder and even fed her personally. This action of Yukito was seen entirely by Eru, who collapsed in disappointment. Indeed, Yukito liked Lolican. The next morning, Yukito summoned everyone and announced that from now on, their cult would implement a dual deity system. As soon as he finished speaking, more than half of Mitama's followers had been taken by Adder. Yukito turned to ask Adder to try using her power. With just one shot, she had pierced through a huge rock. In terms of combat, Adder was far superior to Mitama. Now Yukito had a strategic card. It was time to expand their territory. 3 farmers were being chased by a monster when Adder appeared and took it down with one strike. Luckily, Yukito's group was having a BBQ party nearby, which was how these men survived. Looking at their feast, the 3 farmers drooled beef and wine were things no Kakuri village had. So Yukito seized the opportunity to boast. Their village not only had these things, but also electricity to light up the night, water pipelines so they didn't have to go to the well, and especially delicious meals that even the Imperial capital didn't have. Yukito began to persuade the 3 farmers. They would be provided with all these things, with just one condition. The entire population of their Kakuri village must worship Mitama as a deity. Thanks to this campaign, the number of Mitama's followers had now increased to nearly 3,000 people. This was the 3rd Kakuri village they had conquered. This number of followers was quite substantial now. Yukito began to think about the other Archons. He assigned Shuru the task of gathering more information about them. Shiru brought him some papers. There was a rumor that recently, a girl named Daini, who claimed to be a deity, had appeared and, like them, was establishing a cult with a scale of 10,000 people. Yukito immediately turned to ask Adder if she knew any more information. Adder didn't know much, only that Daini had abilities related to love. Mitama and Adder wanted to march out and destroy this cult right away, but Yukito held them back. There was a better way to destroy a cult, and that was to infiltrate it internally and take control from within. A meeting was held with the participation of Shiru, Roy, and Eru. Infiltrating was easy, but the difficulty was that they might be brainwashed. Because of this, they needed knowledge to resist that temptation. If Daini's power was related to love, then in today's training session, Yukito would teach the three of them about sex. After the lesson, only Roy and Eru followed Yukito. Shiru had excused herself early. Looking at her, she always seemed open. Yet when it came to these matters, she was too embarrassed and ran away. Very quickly, the group arrived at Daini's cult headquarters. The place was so dazzling that Yukito thought it was a love hotel. Just then, two girls came out after finishing their meal, and Yukito took the opportunity to ask them a few questions. So the group was led inside by a person named Rish, who appeared. This girl was the vice president of the association, so wherever she went, she attracted attention. At this moment, someone embarrassedly ran over to ask for advice. Yukito couldn't understand anything, but Roy and Aru found it very interesting. However, things were already not going smoothly. Due to regulations, they were only allowed to meet the cult leader as a male-female pair, so they would be divided into two pairs. Aru and Yukito would go in first. Mitama and Roy waited in the next room. Yukito sat quietly on the mat, sweating, and gently reminded Aru to be careful. According to what he knew, Daini was a deity who liked to eat human flesh. He wondered what form she would take here. The door opened, and Yukito was quite surprised when the person who appeared was a very cute girl. Then Yukito asked Daini for permission to join the cult, and she immediately agreed before leaving. This was so smooth that it made Yukito very confused. But as soon as the room door closed, trouble began. Yukito's body heated up, and he was pinned to the ground by Aru, who demanded to have sex. Yukito tried to stay calm. Since arriving here, he had been very careful not to inhale or eat anything, so he certainly couldn't have been drugged with an aphrodisiac. Could this be Daini's power? Just as Yukito's mind was beginning to fade, a loud noise rang out. From the next room, Mitama had kicked Roy's mouth through to this side. Mitama ran over to tell Yukito that Roy had just tried to molest her. Too embarrassed, Roy had run away immediately. Outside, Daini came to meet Rish, delegating the management of the new disciples to her. Rish followed orders and came to the room to check the situation, accidentally witnessing firsthand Mitama using her power to fix the wall she had just broken. Yukito was startled and hurriedly pressed Rish against the wall, threatening her not to reveal this. Somehow, just by touching her, Rish's face turned red, her hands and feet fumbled, and she said some misleading things before reaching climax. A while later, Rish regained consciousness to find herself tightly bound, lying on the ground. After learning that Mitama was a deity, Rish immediately knelt down, begging Yukito's group to help her eradicate this evil cult. Bertrand followed Loki to the Imperial capital. The place looked the same as before, but in reality, it wasn't. Loki pointed to an alley filled with the corpses of people who had died from illness. In the past, when the Congress still existed, they would handle the dead, but now it was completely different. No one cleaned up their bodies. The citizens continued to live their soulless lives out of habit. If this continued, the Imperial capital would soon perish. This was why Loki decided to act. At this point, if she didn't act, she feared being outmaneuvered by the other archons. Loki turned to Bertrand and created two illusions, one of Adder and one of Daini, then explained, not all archons had combat abilities. They were divided into two types. The first type, like Adder, was destructive. The second type, like Loki and Daini, had the ability to transform and manipulate people's hearts. Although everyone was very powerful, Loki was still confident that she would be the last one to ascend to divinity. Back at Daini's cult, Roy was still trying to escape. Of course, the followers didn't give Roy a chance to escape. They caught him and brought him before the cult leader, Daini. Meanwhile, Rish was now obediently telling them everything. She had joined this cult only because of a misunderstanding. At first, she had just bought a few forbidden books to read to learn more about gender information. But somehow the villagers called her a sex maniac. Then somehow she became an elder in this association. In short, Rish wanted to cooperate with Yukito to destroy this evil cult. After hearing this, Yukito was still hesitant, not knowing if what she said was the truth. However, if they had someone helping from the inside, conquering this cult would be much easier. So Yukito agreed to cooperate with Rish. Very quickly, Aru and Rish became friends, exchanging information about the forbidden books. Suddenly, Mitama screamed, startling Yukito. She cried, telling Yukito that the number of her followers was decreasing at a dizzying rate. Back at the Kakuri village, Ricky's group and the farmers worked together to tie up a wild beast. This one was much bigger than the previous ones. They had to struggle a lot to hold it for a few seconds, and then finally, their net was torn to shreds. Ricky turned to call loudly to Shuru that they could only hold it for this much time, but that was more than enough. It was time for Adder to take the stage. With just one energy blast, Adder blew away the forest beast, also clearing the mountain behind her. Shuru jumped forward to hug Adder in praise. Indeed, with little Adder here, they felt much more at ease. At this moment, Adder curiously asked Shuru why she didn't go with Yukito's group. Shuru immediately turned away, giving excuses that she had to protect the village and so on. Adder opened her palm to check. It seemed her power had been enhanced once again. Meanwhile, Yukito's group, after deciding to form an alliance with Rish, was introduced by Rish to the people in the cult. Being newcomers, everyone looked at Yukito and Oru with interest, inviting them to practice with them. Of course, Rish had already chased all of them away. Then she turned to ask Yukito. Now that she had helped them successfully infiltrate the cult, the next step had to be planned by Yukito. Before that, Yukito needed to ask Rish a few things. What he needed to ask was about the cult leader Daini. Did she appear here frequently? Rish confirmed that she didn't, because this wasn't the only Daini cult. It had been established in many other villages as well. Today, Daini had appeared here, so from tomorrow, she would go to other villages. It was estimated that it would take about 1 to 2 weeks for Daini to return to this place. With this information, Yukito immediately came up with a brilliant idea. He turned to call Mitama, only to see the little girl lying face down on the ground, complaining that the number of followers had decreased sharply. At first, it was 3,000 people, but now it was only 500. Yukito wasn't surprised at all. This was how the cult operated. Mitama's absence from the village was the reason her followers had decreased. Yukito had encountered a similar situation before, but such a strong decrease seemed a bit unusual. Yukito sighed deeply and asked Mitama for help, promising her that after this, he would seriously become a follower of Mitama. Immediately, Mitama regained her spirit, ready to help Yukito with everything. At another branch where Daini was coming to inspect, she was very pleased that the number of her followers was increasing day by day. But somehow she felt that her power wasn't increasing accordingly. At this moment, a group of men surrounded Daini, showing her the tools they had just acquired: Viagra, vibrators, and so on. Daini was suffocating, unable to answer them. After a while, she learned that these items were provided by Rish. Back at Rish's branch, Rish was holding an extra class for the followers, teaching them knowledge and how to use the tools she provided, with the belief that by using them well, they would be able to get closer to the level of Lord Daini. Everything was going too smoothly, exactly according to Yukito's plan. Followers from other branches also had to come here to attend this extra class of Rish's. Thanks to this, Rish had quickly gained the trust of many people, more than the self-proclaimed lord who was often absent. Yukito had to prepare very carefully before the number of Mitama's followers decreased to 0. At this moment, Daini appeared, pressing Rish against the wall to question her. She never asked Rish to do these things. Could it be that Rish was planning to betray her? Of course, Rish remained firm, claiming she never had such thoughts. At this point, Yukito's plan began to take effect, as other followers spoke up to protect Rish. Now Daini understood why her power wasn't increasing. She ordered her subordinates to capture Yukito's group and Rish. Roy appeared as one of her followers, punching Yukito in the stomach, which caught him by complete surprise. This guy hadn't been seen for several days. It turned out he had already been recruited by Daini. Roy was now completely devoted to Daini, staying by her side with the code name Jar King. The group was quickly dragged outside for trial. Starting with the first question, Daini grabbed Rish's face and interrogated her, asking why Rish had acted that way. Seeing Rish tongue-tied, Daini brought the executioner to behead Yukito first. At this moment, Rish finally spoke up. She burst into tears, lamenting that it was because she had worshipped the cult leader too much. She worshipped her so much that she wanted to be like the cult leader, tried to understand more, learn more, and spread more to the followers in their cult. If death was necessary to prove her loyalty, Rish was willing to die to show her devotion to the cult leader. Rish cried. Hearing these words, the followers below also shed tears. They never expected Rish to be such a noble person. Then, in unison, they asked Daini to spare Rish. The corner of Yukito's mouth curled up. This was the result of the private lesson between him and Rish. Going back a few hours earlier, Yukito had called Rish into a room. He knew full well that soon Daini would discover and come here to question them. so they had to prepare very carefully. And so their acting class began. Having had a foundation before, Rish learned very quickly, so quickly that she even made her teacher, Yukito, burst into tears of emotion when watching her performance. Back to reality, everyone was shouting for Daini to spare Rish. Daini was torn, not knowing what to do. At this moment, she noticed Yukito was smiling. Now she realized Yukito was the puppeteer. With no other choice, she had to disperse everyone and stop the trial. However, stopping the trial was one thing. Imprisoning Yukito's group was another. Roy was assigned this task. Yukito had tried his best to reason with his friend, but it had no effect. It seemed he had been completely brainwashed. After Roy left, Yukito tried to find a way to break out of prison and escape. The wall was too solid. They needed Mitama's power. Unfortunately, she had run out of power. Just at this moment, a group of muscular men appeared. Rish jumped in fear, telling Yukito that this was the Purge group that had appeared alongside Daini from the early days of establishing the cult. Their appearance here was probably on Daini's orders to eliminate them. Going back to the day when Daini was created with the power of love, Daini thought her mission was to help humans increase their population. But it was completely opposite to her imagination. The king ordered Daini to use her power to completely erase human love, preventing citizens from having children at will. This made Daini a bit confused, and she asked the king, if there were no births, the country would soon become extinct. The king had already considered this artificial reproduction would be enough. Things like desire and freedom were unnecessary. Everything in this kingdom had to be arranged according to his order. So day after day, Daini had only one mission: to erase all love from the hearts of the Imperial capital's citizens. Who knows how many days and years had passed. As usual, today Daini was also carrying out her mission. Then she was startled to realize that today's citizens were very different. They completely lacked the ability to reproduce, even before Daini used her power. Now Daini understood she too had reached the point of being discarded. Afterward, in an attempt to hold on to everything, Daini wrote a few books teaching about gender and sex, selling them in the Imperial capital to stimulate the curiosity of its citizens. From then on, those books were called forbidden books. Another long period of time passed. One day, Daini met a very strange little girl. The girl was sitting under a bridge, her face red as she read a forbidden book. Daini's appearance startled the girl, whose eyes were teary as she begged Daini to give it back to her. This girl was Toka, a girl completely different from the rest, born with love in her heart. From then on, Toka became Daini's friend. Toka's difference made her considered a freak in the Imperial capital. But Daini cherished the little girl. Compared to those who lived like machines, Daini preferred people who lived freely, living according to their own aspirations, like this little girl. This was what Daini wanted in this human world. However, the good days didn't last long. Toka was banished to Kakuri, a village established to exile those who were peculiar and incompatible with the Imperial capital's management. Daini thought it was a good place for Toka to live, but it wasn't. On a rainy day several years later, Daini saw Toka's corpse with her own eyes. The Congress, fearing that Toka would reach adulthood, have relationships, and give birth in the Kakuri village, had eliminated the little girl right there, holding Toka's body in her arms. This was the first time Daini cried since she was born. Now she had decided Daini decided to return this world to its original law, where humans could live freely, fall in love, form families, and have children. Daini vowed to make this happen at any cost. Back to Yukito's group, the Purge men broke the iron bars and entered the prison. Yukito was sweating profusely, wondering what to do. Just at this moment, a loud explosion rang out. It was Adder and Shiro coming to rescue them. Mitama, lying on the ground, still tried to turn and look at Adder, only to be greatly disappointed. The number of Adder's followers had now reached 6,000. Adder then launched another attack at the Purge group, blowing them away. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yukito shouted for everyone to run quickly. Rish stood up to run as ordered, but she was grabbed by the shirt and pulled down by a Purge man. In the most critical moment, Aru picked up the vibrator that Rish had dropped on the ground and stabbed it into the Purge man's body, creating an opportunity for everyone to escape. As they went, Mitama complained to Yukito about where Adder's followers had come from. Now was the time for Yukito to explain the entire plan to everyone. A deity would lose followers if they weren't by their side. This was completely true for Mitama. Because she had left the village, her followers decreased. Those followers had all transferred to Adder's side, simply because she stayed behind to protect the village. Yukito's plan was divided into two steps. The first step was to infiltrate Daini's organization and reduce her fighting power. The next step was to concentrate all power on Adder, who was more combat-oriented than Mitama. From the beginning, Yukito had aimed for a winning plan, which was to conquer Daini's cult by force. The group rushed into a room where Daini was already waiting to block their path. Only now did Daini realize that Yukido was the person Loki had mentioned. Yukido shouted, calling for everyone to prepare for Phase 2. Immediately, Adder appeared, shooting Daini straight into the wall, while Rish hugged Mitama and left by another route. Adder stepped forward and declared to Daini that for daring to oppose the Congress and Emperor, she would have to face punishment. Despite being hit, Daini remained indifferent as if nothing had happened, teasing Adder that the Congress and those things no longer existed. Then she tried to launch a sneak attack on Adder, but it failed. Being former teammates, Adder took pity and didn't kill Daini, only wanting to render her unable to resist them. This remark from Adder had touched Daini's pride. She unleashed her true power for Yukido's group to witness. There was one thing Yukido had miscalculated here. He had no idea how many followers Daini had. The number that appeared made Yukido freeze. 14,000, double the number of followers Adder currently had. Rish carried Mitama away, explaining to her as they went that from now on, they had to act according to the plan Yukido had set out beforehand. Whether it would succeed or not depended entirely on Mitama. Meanwhile, Yukido's group was currently in an extremely disadvantageous situation. Daini, riding on a giant skull, fired an energy beam at them. They were hit immediately, and a mark appeared on their stomachs. This was a mark that stimulated sexual instinct. Very quickly, Shiru and Eru lost their reason. They rushed forward to share the cake named Yukido. Even Adder couldn't resist this overwhelming power and crawled over, wanting to eat Yukido along with the sisters Eru. Yukido had tried his best, but it seemed not to work. His reason was fading. Just as Yukido was about to devour the 3 Sweetwater girls, a huge vine grew up from the ground, separating them all. It was Mitama, the little girl, had returned. Behind Mitama was Rish, and behind Rish was a group of followers. Rish began her admonition, enlightening the followers behind her. From now on, they would worship Mitama as a deity, thanks to the love experience and sexual tools that Mitama brought to them. The battle turned. The number of Daini's followers decreased dramatically. Those followers were transferred to Mitama. In this situation, Daini was still very confident. Taking away followers, so what? You still can't win, she said. But as soon as she finished speaking, her skull immediately disappeared, along with the sexual marks on Yukido and the other 3. What the hell is happening? Daini was confused. Mitama smirked. After all, how could a fake deity compare to a real deity like Mitama? From the previous battle with Adder, she had realized some issues. Archons like Daini were just borrowing the power of a deity, acting cool like that, but in reality, Mitama herself had to go meet the deity Daini, kowtowing and begging her to withdraw the power used by the Archons. Daini didn't believe it and rushed to attack Mitama, but by now there was no chance anymore. Adder appeared to block the attack and counterattack. Knowing that she couldn't possibly match a combat-type Archon like Adder, Daini turned and ran, leaving Roy behind to block their way. Somehow, at this very moment, Roy turned and betrayed her. It turned out that while in prison, Yukido had slipped Roy a piece of paper, reminding him that in the most dangerous situation, it was the easiest time to win a girl's heart. After all, Mitama was still a girl, which was why Roy decided to betray Daini. This was the end. Adder rushed forward and landed a strike right on Daini's mouth. She lay motionless on the ground, not believing that she had lost. But that wasn't all she could do. As Daini tried to stand up, Rish appeared from behind. The book she always carried with her turned out to be Toka's, and Toka, surprisingly, was Rish's mother. Daini looked at Rish with wide eyes indeed. She looked very much like Toka. Then she remembered the day when the two of them sat together, and Toka had shared her wish with Daini. The little girl wanted to meet someone she loved, to have children. Yet now, Daini was harming Toka's child. Daini burst into tears, apologizing to Rish, apologizing for hurting her. Very soon after, Daini was tied up and imprisoned. Even in this situation, she remained defiant, letting Yukido do whatever he wanted with her. As for Yukido, he had only one request for her. Daini would have to announce to all her followers that they should worship Mitama as a new deity. Of course, Daini refused, forcing Yukido to make some threats before leaving, giving her more time to reconsider. The very next day, Rish appeared in Daini's cell. Somehow Rish had a rope in her hand, and Yukido was being controlled by her and dragged here. Moreover, Yukido had now been tamed by Rish, which greatly surprised Daini. Rish began to beat Yukido very brutally in front of Daini. Pigs should go oink oink, she said. Every time Yukido didn't make the sound, he would receive a painful whip. After torturing Yukido enough, Rish approached Daini and untied her. She hoped that once again, the two of them would restore this cult. To do that, Daini needed to hand over all the followers she currently had to Rish. Rish vowed to lead them very strictly, once again bringing their cult to a new height. Daini was deeply moved by Rish's speech and nodded in agreement immediately, partly because she trusted Rish, as she was Toka's daughter, and partly because Rish acted too well. It turned out that after leaving the prison, Yukido had quickly called a meeting to discuss how to absorb all of her followers. Upon hearing this, Rish came up with a very unique idea. Before Yukido could understand what she meant, he had already been controlled and tied tightly to a table. The acting class began, with Yukido playing the role of a lustful pig, and Rish, Oru, and Shiru as the trainers. Thanks to that rehearsal, they completely fooled Daini. After finishing business at the cult, Yukido and the group set off back to the village. Mitama checked her follower count and laughed out loud, boasting to Yukido that her followers had reached 10,000. Now she wouldn't lose to anyone anymore. Where did these followers come from? Of course, from Daini's cult. Daini had handed over full authority to manage the cult to Rish. Since Rish worshipped Mitama, those followers were transferred to the little girl. However, there was one thing Yukido wasn't sure about. He had a feeling that Daini knew all about their deception, but still deliberately went along with their act. While thinking, suddenly a wild beast appeared, blocking their vehicle. Adder launched a strike, eliminating it immediately. Mitama looked with wide eyes, then was surprised how come the number of Adder's followers was still greater than hers. As for where these followers came from, Adder didn't know either. But there was one thing Adder was certain of: with this number of followers, she wouldn't lose to anyone anymore. Soon, she would restore this empire. While she was boasting, wild beasts came again. This time, it wasn't just one, but a whole herd. At first, Adder was confident she could handle it. But when she saw their increasing numbers, she began to sweat and told everyone, "We're in trouble, sisters. This many is beyond my control." The wild beasts rushed to attack their vehicle. Fortunately, Mitama had used her power in time to create a barrier to protect everyone. Yukido broke out in a sweat, saying there was trouble. The direction from which the herd of wild beasts had come was the direction of their village. The group quickly returned to the village. The scene before them left everyone stunned. All that remained was a pile of ruins. Could it be that everyone was dead? Just then, Ricky and a few other young men ran over. Fortunately, Shiru had prepared shelters for everyone beforehand, so this time they were lucky enough to survive the disaster. Aru sadly went to the front of her shop and picked up the sign. Seeing this, Shiru hurriedly ran over to comfort her sister. "It's okay, we'll restore everything like it was before." At this moment, Yukido had gone to Mitama to ask the little girl to help him restore the village. With 10,000 followers, Yukido knew very well that Mitama had more than enough power to do this. After hearing him, Mitama refused immediately. If she restored the village to its original state, she would lose all the power she had just gained. She didn't want that to happen again. At this moment, Adder also spoke up, asking Mitama to help her. Yukido joined in, and seeing this, everyone in the village began to cheer and flatter Mitama. Mitama listened with her mouth curling upward. Although reluctant, in the end, she still used her power to restore the village. On a nearby hill, someone had witnessed the whole incident. It turned out this person was the one who had commanded the wild beasts to attack Kakuri. Somehow, she was then thrown by the wild beasts, which turned back to attack her. After the village was restored, everyone held another grand celebration. Just as Mitama had feared, restoring the village required a great power, and her 10,000 followers disappeared with it. Shiru brought a bottle of wine to thank Mitama and Yukido. Yukido didn't dare accept this thanks. From the beginning, this cult was established for the benefit of everyone, so if they lost a little benefit, the cult would also fall apart. Therefore, restoring the village was a necessity. This was the weakness of their cult. While Yukido was thinking about countermeasures, Ricky hurriedly ran over to report that their village was being attacked by wild beasts. Roy was in danger. On Roy's side, he was carrying that girl on his back and running away from the wild beasts. A wild beast very quickly blocked Roy's path. It seemed he was done for, but fortunately, Adder appeared just in time to save Roy. Roy then put the girl down. Seeing she was injured, Roy began his speech, asking permission to take off her clothes to check the wound. As soon as he finished speaking, Roy received a kick in the mouth and was flattened. After hitting Roy, that girl fell to the ground, complaining that she was injured. Finding her a bit strange, Yukido called for Adder to risk her life for him. Adder had just approached to ask about her when she jumped forward and kissed Adder, shocking Adder into fainting on the spot. After kissing Adder, she turned to look at Yukido, introducing herself as Gaia, an archon with the ability to control wild beasts. She came here to give Yukido a proposal related to the life and death of this Kakuri village. Upon hearing this, Yukido threw Mitama at Gaia, then rushed forward and knocked her to the ground, his hand firmly gripping a brick. Her power was very dangerous. If she aimed at the village, he would eliminate her right now. Gaia, frightened, hurriedly explained that it was just a misunderstanding. Afterward, Gaia was brought to the restaurant by everyone. Looking at Gaia's mere 2 followers, Mitama couldn't help but burst into laughter, mocking her. Gaia also explained further that because she didn't have followers, she couldn't fully use her power. On the contrary, she was attacked by the wild beasts in reverse. This time, Gaia came here with a single purpose. She wanted to form an alliance with Yukido to defeat Archon Loki. According to what Gaia knew, Loki was the one who had initiated this fight, and she seemed to have prepared a plan for complete victory. The very next day, the group went to the Imperial capital to scout. In front of them was a huge, towering wall. This had never existed before. Yukido sweated as he looked up. Mitama wanted to test its hardness a bit, but was stopped by Gaia. She placed her hand on the ground, creating a wild beast to scout. It had just flown to the top of the wall when it was shot down. "That's the price if they dare to cross that wall," she said. Just as she finished speaking, a dark figure rushed out from inside the Imperial capital. It was Bertrand, who pointed her sword at Yukido and declared that anyone who dared to target the Imperial capital would die. Before she could look cool for even 2 seconds, Bertrand tripped and fell flat on her face. Then was too embarrassed and asked Yukido to just kill her. Aru ran over to help Bertrand up, wanting to take her back to the village. At this moment, Loki suddenly appeared from somewhere behind Yukido, putting her arm around his shoulder. Yukido, startled, immediately stabbed a sword into her throat. He knew full well it wasn't the real Loki. There was no way she would bring her true form to face them like this. Loki frowned and asked Yukido what he intended to do this time, even bringing along the Divine Waste duo. Seeing herself being mocked as waste by Loki, Mitama couldn't stand it and let her know she already had 10,000 followers. "Oh, is that so?" Loki also showed her strength to Mitama. Her current follower count was already 1.12 million, a huge number that frightened Mitama, who hid behind Yukido. Yukido patted Mitama's head to comfort her, saying not to worry. 1.12 million? That's less than what I predicted. This scouting seemed a bit redundant. He called everyone to return, then turned back to gently remind Loki not to do anything excessive, or she would die. The group left, leaving Loki confused. She didn't understand what Yukido had just said. After returning to the village, Yukido finally breathed a sigh of relief. It turned out he was just trying to appear strong earlier. 1.12 million was too large. If Loki had been a bit smarter just now, they wouldn't have returned safely. Then Yukido asked Bertrand about what had happened in the Imperial capital. According to what Bertrand told him, Yukido understood. Loki had now replaced the Emperor, using her power to subdue them as followers. For others, this number of followers was too large. But for Yukido, it was a mistake because these followers belonged to the Emperor, not truly to Loki. This was her weakness that they could counterattack, and Yukido had come up with a plan. From his pocket, Yukido pulled out a pair of black sunglasses and declared, "The idol production plan officially begins." The plan was quickly implemented by Yukido. A band named Worship the Deity Mitama was officially born, featuring Adder, Aru, Shiru, and Gaia. Yukido stood in a corner, looking cool as he adjusted his glasses. Although it took quite a lot of preparation time, everything was going according to his plan. Mitama, beside him, lay flat, complaining, "How could it be like this? Why am I not the one on stage? No matter how you look at it, this doesn't look like a cult. It's just a band and a group of fans." Going back to a few days ago when Yukido discussed the plan with everyone, he clearly outlined each goal and purpose for them to understand. Mitama thought she would be the main performer, but Yukido immediately doused her with cold water. He said he was too stupid to try to make Mitama a deity from the early days of establishing the cult, a dark past he didn't want to mention. Yukido ignored Mitama's complaints and turned to discuss with Aru, asking if anyone in their group knew about music. The whole group looked dumbfounded and asked Yukido in return, "What is music? Can it be eaten?" Now Yukido understood. In this world, there was absolutely no concept of music. It seemed it had also been controlled by the Imperial capital. Very good, then he would bring it back to this world. Right after that were Aru's group's rehearsal sessions. Bertrand was also allowed to participate at first, but she had absolutely no talent and was immediately kicked out by Yukido. Back to reality, Yukido happily stood looking at his achievement. People tend to follow trends. If music was conveyed by him to a certain extent, it would become a wave. Mitama still wasn't satisfied and complained. At this moment, her power increased. Mitama thought she had gained more followers and checked, but it hadn't increased at all. This was also part of Yukido's plan, a practical experiment. Yukido recalled the early days when Aru and Shiru had just joined, and Mitama's power had increased dramatically. At that time, they thought Aru and Shiru were special. But after careful reflection, Yukito believed there must be another reason. And he had found it. It was the cohesion of the church. From the beginning, their cult was established based on benefits, so that was a weakness that could easily collapse. But now it was different. Thanks to music bringing them together, the faith and cohesion of the cult would increase dramatically. With this much power, Mitama wanted to go challenge Loki right away, but was held back by Yukito. Before that, there was one matter he needed to resolve. Yukito returned home, where Bertrand was crying, thinking she was useless. Yukito pointed at Bertrand's face. A person who doesn't know how to play instruments, doesn't know how to sing, and doesn't know how to dance, what can Bertrand do? Bertrand cried even louder, begging Yukito not to abandon her, promising to do anything he asked. Just waiting for this from Bertrand, Yukito gave her a mission: to monitor all of Gaia's actions. Following Yukito's orders, Bertrand snuck onto Gaia's vehicle and followed her everywhere in Kakuri village. When she saw two children shooting marbles, Gaia stopped and jumped down to greet the kids. Then she pretended to fall to the ground so the little ones would help her up. To thank them, Gaia began to persuade them to come to her house to play. Somehow the children here were too smart. Even though Gaia said she had a lot of candy, they refused and left. In a nearby forest, a little girl was being attacked by wild beasts. Bertrand drew her sword and rushed to help. But before she could get close, Gaia had already taken care of the wild beasts. Then Gaia invited the little girl to come to her house to play. Of course, being too scared, the little girl had already run away. Gaia sighed deeply, then drove the beast away. Bertrand followed Gaia all the way home. As soon as she opened the door and entered, the children ran to greet Gaia. Each one called Gaia mother and was very close to her. After witnessing everything, Bertrand returned to report to Yukito. Now Yukito understood. Gaia's cult was established as a family, and a family always has a head of household. Yukito's previous world also had several cults that rose from families. To defeat Gaia would be very easy: usurp the position of the head of the family and take control of the followers. To do this, Yukito had called his secret card. The next morning, while Yukito was standing waiting for that person to arrive, suddenly Bertrand rushed to attack him, catching Yukito off guard. Bertrand drew her sword, cutting off Yukito's clothes, then kept going for his little brother. For this abnormal sexual urge, Yukito shouted loudly, calling for Daini. Rish slapped Daini on the butt, telling her to turn off that power, which helped Bertrand return to normal. Daini excitedly ran over to tease Bertrand, making her cry with embarrassment and run away. Then she turned to threaten Yukito, saying they weren't his henchmen to be called upon whenever. This time, it was out of respect for Rish that they came to help Yukito. But that wasn't enough. It was just that Yukito and this thing called music had interested Daini, so she came to help Yukito to make it give and take, Rish explained. Afterward, they quickly got to the main issue. There was a person Yukito needed Daini to confront and eliminate. Very quickly, Daini got to work. While Gaia's children were fetching water, Daini had approached and befriended them. Meanwhile, Gaia was constantly criticized by Yukito and Mitama for her poor drumming skills and was made to stay for more practice. Having been kept here for several days, Gaia was also worried about whether the kids were okay. But because Yukito acted so well, Gaia didn't have any suspicions at all. During that time, Daini very quickly won the affection of those kids on the other side. Only the two oldest, Kai and Cyan, remained. These two, after a few days, also realized that someone wanted to destroy their family. While returning from hunting, they accidentally heard strange noises. Thinking their younger siblings were doing something perverted, they ran to the riverbank to catch them in the act. But it wasn't that they were just playing water guns with Daini. Daini also happily invited Kai and Cyan to join them. Before that, Yukito had devised a plan for Daini to execute a very simple plan. He only needed Daini to use her power to win over Gaia's children. Daini also found it strange that Yukito was working so carelessly this time. Yukito explained right away that he wanted to quickly save those children. A family should be natural, not a tool to help Gaia increase her power. Surely after Gaia achieved her purpose, she would discard them. He didn't want that to happen. Back to reality, Kai and Cyan were scolding their younger siblings. According to the family law that Gaia had set, they were not allowed to approach or play with anyone else, other than the members of their family. Yet now they were breaking the law and had to face punishment. The little ones, scared, huddled beside Daini, trying to explain to Kai and Cyan that Daini was not a bad person at all. Playing with her was very fun, and surely Mother Gaia would understand. Despite their explanations and Daini adding a few words, Kai and Cyan didn't care at all. What the hell is family? We don't understand. This statement made Daini begin to feel that something wasn't right with these two kids. Just as she finished speaking, a wild beast emerged from the stream, followed by several more. Daini jumped in fright and hurriedly ran over to protect the little ones. Kai, at this point, didn't care about his siblings anymore. If they had broken the family law, they had to face punishment. He ordered the wild beasts to attack Daini. Daini had to lead the children in a hasty escape. As she ran, she gritted her teeth and cursed Yukido. How could an archon like her have to turn and run from these low-level wild beasts? If she still had her powers, they wouldn't stand a chance. It was all because Yukido dared to steal her followers. Kai and Cyan ran behind the wild beasts. They had borrowed these beasts from Gaia, and with this power, they swore to destroy anyone who dared to harm their family. A glimpse of Cyan's past. She, like many other children, was artificially produced in the Imperial capital. At a certain age, she would be assigned to any family to continue raising her. Although they were just foster parents, they still treated Cyan like their own child, which made Cyan very happy. She loved her parents very much, until that day when Cyan was enjoying a meal with her family. Her father was raided by soldiers and summoned to fulfill the end-of-life duty. Cyan burst into tears, begging them not to take him away. But somehow, instead of thanking their daughter for caring, they looked at Cyan with contempt, and as a result, Cyan was banished to Kakuri village. On the way, Cyan met Kai. Seeing they were about the same age, Kai started a conversation with Cyan. But by then, Cyan didn't care about anything anymore. In her heart, there was only darkness, believing in nothing. What was family anyway? She felt she had been deceived because her parents were people who could be found anywhere in the Imperial capital. At this moment, their vehicle was attacked by a wild beast. Kai hurriedly grabbed Cyan's hand and hid behind the vehicle. At their most dangerous moment, Gaia appeared and saved the two children. Gaia took them to the stream and bandaged Cyan, listening to the stories of the two children as she did so. When she learned they had been abandoned, Gaia began her performance. Gaia approached and hugged Cyan, letting the little girl know that she understood what Cyan had been through. Cyan understood why she slapped Gaia in the face. But instead of getting angry, Gaia still gave the little girl a smile. Then she invited Cyan and Kai to start over together. She promised to create a real family for them. Back to reality, Kai and Cyan were still following Dakina's group. As they left the edge of the forest, Yukido's group was already waiting in front of them. The wild beasts they had borrowed from Gaia had already been beautifully dealt with by Adder. Now only these two kids remained. It would be very easy to handle. Yukido stepped forward in front of them. What he needed to do was to enlighten these kids, both physically and mentally. Cyan angrily pulled out her bow, wanting to shoot Yukido. At this moment, the ground shook violently. Mitama sweated and reminded Yukido to run before it was too late. From behind Yukido, Gaia had been there all along. She covered her face and burst out laughing. "Yukido, you really have succeeded, haven't you? Daring to keep me with a fake band, then taking the opportunity to destroy my family?" Yukido shouted, reminding Gaia to know her place. This was just his first step. If Gaia continued to secretly increase her power in the future, he would conquer her entire cult. The future? There won't be any future anymore. The ground became even more turbulent. From underground, a giant worm appeared in front of Yukido's group. Though a bit early, at this point, Gaia was also willing to go all out with Yukido. Kai and Cyan ran to their mother's side. Gaia smiled, praising them for protecting the family very well. But that's enough. As soon as she finished speaking, the ground beneath Kai and Cyan turned into mud and began to pull them down. Cyan tried to beg, but Gaia didn't care because from the beginning, she had no understanding of what family was. Back to Yukido's group. They were now running for their lives. That thing was too terrible. Although Ader had put in all her effort, she couldn't cause even a little damage to it. It counterattacked Yukido's group with an energy beam. Mitama hurriedly tensed all her muscles to create a barrier to protect them. She could only do this much. This situation wasn't good. Seeing this, Yukido hurriedly ran to Mitama. Earlier, Mitama had begged Daini to withdraw the archon's power, so now she should do the same with Gaia. Mitama denied it immediately. Unlike Daini, this deity Gaia couldn't communicate, so begging her was impossible. Not knowing what to do, Oru and Shuru had driven up to rescue them. The car had been modified by Yukido beforehand, so its speed was very fast. Thanks to that, they easily lost the monster. After the battle, Yukido was still shocked. What on earth was that monster? At this moment, a child spoke up to explain to Yukido. It was called Typhon, the strongest wild beast that Gaia could summon. Daini still didn't understand how someone with only 2 followers like Gaia could control such a powerful thing. The reason was very simple. This Typhon didn't cost energy to control like other wild beasts. It was very obedient, so she only needed to successfully summon it. As for why Tussie knew this, it was all in the book the boy was holding. This was a book about ancient history, an ancient time before the Imperial capital was established. Yukito was dumbfounded listening to Tusi's explanation. This child was definitely a genius. How could someone so young remember the history of formation from ancient times? Compared to the people beside Yukito, Tusi was a real bargain. Yukito moved closer, about to ask Tusi to do something, when the typhon appeared from under the ground. Earlier, they had only seen a part of its body. Its real body was much larger. How could they escape from this monster now? The ground shook violently, causing two children to almost fly off the car. Yukito rushed forward to grab their hands and pull them back, but he was the one who fell. As soon as he touched the ground, Yukito was pierced in the stomach by the monster. Mitama also jumped out of the car to run to Yukito, and both were taken into the monster's mouth. The group dejectedly drove back to the village. At this point, everyone had no hope that Yukito was still alive. It was too difficult to survive in that situation. Was this really the end for this village? If it was just about protecting the village, Adder had more than enough power to do that. But it was Yukito and Mitama who had brought them closer together. Losing those two was impossible. Yukito was now hazily waking up. He was tightly bound in a room that looked a bit creepy. Gaia appeared before him in a different form. This room was created inside Typhon's body. Earlier, Gaia had tried every way to kill Yukito but couldn't. Estimated about 300 times already. Every time Yukito stopped breathing, Mitama would use her power to resurrect him. It seemed Mitama really cared for Yukito. Gaia stepped forward, kissed Yukito on the mouth, and then began to pay attention to his little brother. Back at Kakuri village, they couldn't remain depressed like this forever. Aru stood up and boosted everyone's spirits. She believed that with Mitama's divine power, the two would certainly be safe. At that moment, the necklace Yukito had given her suddenly glowed, and a copy of Mitama escaped from it, informing everyone that Yukito and the others were still safe. Meanwhile, Gaia was still telling Yukito her biography. She was the only archon born still carrying memories from before. She had lived since the time when the Imperial capital had not yet been established. At that time, the world was controlled by science, with abundant materials, living carefree. Yet there were still elements with deviant thoughts who wanted to turn this world into a place worshipping deities. Gaia's mother had established a cult and turned her into a tool to attract other followers. She didn't care about using a knife to carve symbols on Gaia's body, which made Gaia's thinking increasingly deviant. Until the climax, when Gaia killed her own mother, she was captured and turned into an archon. Gaia grabbed Yukito's hair, letting him know that from him emanated a scent very similar to her old mother, a scent that deceived others and controlled their minds. That was the only reason Yukito could develop the cult so strongly in such a short time. Gaia began to choke Yukito, declaring that she extremely hated those who worshipped deities. If Yukito and the archons dared to bring that back, she would destroy them all. Yukito's mind began to fade. Was he going to die? Just at this moment, a loud noise rang out outside Typhon. It was Eru's group. They, along with the performance troupe and all the followers, were shouting Yukito's name in unison. Yukito and Mitama had helped them so much. Now it was time for them to repay the favor for saving their lives. With the microphone in hand, Aru pointed at Gaia, who was watching everything, saying, "Return our comrade, or don't blame us." To Aru's singing, the group's performance officially began. The cheerleading team led by Roy cheered enthusiastically. Thanks to that, Adder's power quickly returned. Feeling that was enough, Adder called out to Bertrand and threw her an instrument. The rest of the performance had to be carried out by Bertrand. Then Adder rushed up and delivered a strike that pierced Typhon's head. Dakini was still playing the instrument very diligently. Suddenly, Rish approached from behind and hugged Dakini, beginning to whisper sweet words in her ear. Rish hoped Dakini could save those children for her, and for her deceased mother. If that was Rish's wish, Dakini couldn't refuse. Dakini drew a heart and attacked Typhon. Her power was love. Although it didn't cause damage, once hit, Typhon's heads turned and bit their teammates. Adder flew around Typhon, attacking them, while below, Roy's cheerleading group was still very enthusiastic. And that was the plan this time, devised by Aru and Shuru. They remembered very well what Yukito had taught them. The power of deity would increase if the enthusiasm and unity of their followers became stronger. Gaia, sitting in Typhon, was still sipping her wine as if nothing was happening. There was no way they could defeat Typhon so easily. Immediately, Typhon's heads grew back. It counterattacked, bombarding Eru's performance group. Just at that moment, some vines had grown up to tightly bind Typhon. This surprised Shuru, but Adder found it normal. If Mitama was still alive, her power would also be increased like Adder's. Inside Typhon, Mitama complained that she had used all her strength to control Typhon. Now they had to rely on Eru's group and Yukito. Yukito shouted loudly, calling Gaia, who was beside Mitama. "Oh, do you want me to torture you more?" Gaia approached Yukito, and immediately, Yukito headbutted Gaia and then breathed a sigh of relief. Earlier, he had some unusual thoughts. It was because Gaia had injected those thoughts into his head. But at this point, no way. Hearing this, Gaia burst out laughing. Discovered already? But so what? You can't turn the situation around. At this moment, Mitama suddenly called Yukito. With the remaining number of followers and power, Mitama understood she couldn't win in this situation. But things would be different if Yukito became her follower. It was time to do that. Yukito played along, asking Mitama to untie him first, with the promise to become Mitama's follower right after. Still too easy to deceive. After Mitama untied Yukito, he smirked at the little girl teasingly. He had to use this trick to escape. If he had just simply begged earlier, Mitama would definitely have used the excuse of being out of power. His comrades were still fighting hard out there. It was time for Yukito to counter-attack Gaia. Yukito kicked the table at Gaia, then rushed to attack when Gaia had fallen. Somehow, from her stomach grew a wild beast that attacked Yukito back. Seeing Yukito fall head over heels, Gaia burst out laughing, letting him know that unlike Daini and Loki, she was very good at close combat. Outside, the vines could no longer control Typhon for any longer. Seeing the situation was not good, Tussie began to recall what Yukito had asked him to do before. When Yukito was captured, Tussie had to represent him in controlling this cult. No choice left, had to do it. Tussie slammed his hand down, calling Aru and Shiru to start Plan 2. Everyone received the order and began to gather around Adder, inviting her. It was time to fulfill her duty. If Adder did it, Aru promised to create a room full of ice cream for her. Hearing about ice cream, Adder immediately agreed. She took the microphone and went on stage alone. Under the lights, Adder began to cry and started her speech. First, she thanked the loyal followers. Next, she asked permission to leave the divine position. From now on, Adder hoped they would worship Mitama instead of her. Of course, people wouldn't easily accept this. If Adder wanted to give up the divine position, what would Adder do afterward? As soon as the question was asked, Rish appeared, snatched Adder's microphone, and explained to everyone. Previously, Adder was served by the followers, but after giving up her position as a deity, Adder would have to do the opposite, serve the followers. And their Daini cult would be responsible for training Adder, on the condition that from now on, the followers would have to worship Mitama. Immediately, Adder's followers were all transferred to Mitama. Receiving new power, Mitama easily broke Gaia's bindings and escaped. Now it was time to destroy Gaia. Mitama summoned a giant tree person to fight Typhon, while Yukito directly confronted Gaia. With Mitama's resurrection power, Yukito could ignore all the damage she caused and fight Gaia head-on. Gaia angrily pinned Yukito against the wall. Infinite resurrection? So what? It's not a problem at all. Yukito still feels pain, so I will still be the winner. It's simply a matter of killing Yukito until he loses his mind from pain. As soon as she finished speaking, a branch pierced through Gaia's chest. Yukito escaped and stepped forward to enlighten her. From the beginning, he fought Gaia just to attract attention, to let Mitama launch this finishing move. It was time to end it. Gaia and Typhon exploded. Aru and Shiru's group ended the performance and drove to pick them up. Thanks to Mitama's power, after the explosion, Yukito was still completely unharmed. Aru and the group ran over, crying and hugging Yukito. As for Gaia, after the explosion, she knew she had lost and lay on the ground, accepting punishment. Kai gritted his teeth, drawing his knife, intending to kill Gaia right away, but Cyan stopped the boy. The little girl begged Kai to calm down a bit. Seeing this, Tussie also spoke up to help, suggesting that Cyan should be the one to decide everything. Gaia closed her eyes tightly and began to recall images from the past, images of her killing her own mother with her own hands. From birth, Gaia had always been someone exploited by others, from family to the Congress. That was all of Gaia's memories since birth. Nothing unusual at all. At this moment, Cyan had burst into tears with Gaia. Perhaps Gaia wasn't as good a parent as those in the Imperial capital. She was clumsy in everything, but that made Cyan very happy. The little girl believed that the time they spent together, the emotions Gaia had for them were real, not fake. Once again, Cyan hoped Gaia would start over, once again develop this family to be stronger together. The little girl hugged Gaia tightly in amazement. The war ended, and everyone held another celebration. Adder was spreading ice cream to the kids when Roy appeared. It was time for Adder to fulfill her duty to satisfy everyone, he said. As soon as he finished speaking, Rish appeared and took Roy away. It seemed this guy still needed another course of mental training. On Gaia's side, she sat with little Cyan, chatting when Yukito brought Kai over. He announced that from now on, Gaia's cult would be under the protection of Mitama's cult. However, to prevent what happened today from happening again, Yukito would give supervisory authority to Kai. Gaia smirked at Yukito, threatening that she would tame Kai once more. Regarding this, Yukito wasn't afraid at all because he had already caught the boy's weakness. Going back a few minutes earlier when Yukito called Kai for a private conversation, Yukito knew very well that Kai liked Cyan. That was the only reason why neither Dakini nor Gaia could seduce the boy. So Yukito began to invite Kai to help him, both to help himself and to help Cyan not be controlled by Gaia again. So from now on, their cult had grown stronger. When checking Mitama's follower count again, Yukito was surprised to find that Mitama's followers had reached 300,000. How could it increase so quickly, even when she had received all of Adder's followers? It turned out that Loki had been helping from afar. Discovered by Yukito, Loki didn't hide anymore but came out to talk to him. The reason Loki helped was simple. Partly she didn't want her opponent to fall so quickly, and partly she was afraid that if that typhon attacked the Imperial capital, the damage would be very severe. After exchanging a few verbal jabs with Yukito, Loki turned and left. A while later, when Yukito was standing in contemplation by the stream, Aru and Shiru ran over to call him. Having them there, Yukito also opened up a bit about himself. This was where he first met Aru and was brought to the village by her. From then until now, there had been many ups and downs, but he had been very happy. There were too many memories and things in this village that couldn't be lost. Yukito narrowed his eyes, declaring that whatever the price, he would protect them all. As soon as he finished speaking, Yukito was splashed with wine. It was Roy's group and everyone else. How dare he sneak out alone like this? Yukito had to be punished. Everyone continued to party by the stream. Meanwhile, Aru and Shiru held out their hands, leading Yukito to escape. Yukito laughed, taking their hands. Although this world still had the existence of deities, it was worth living in.